Hello, friends. Welcome back to the place to hear true stories from real people about encounters with the unexplained. Tattooed Biker here with you, and tonight I'm reading 3 emails I've received where viewers share their terrifying experiences with the cryptid known as the Dog Man. So settle in, kick back, and let's ride. Number 1. Dear TB, this happened around 4 years ago, and I wanted to share. You see, I was driving home on an isolated road through a mountainous area. It was late and dark, and honestly, I couldn't have told you exactly where I was. All I knew was that I was in Tioga County, Pennsylvania, and that I needed to stay on the road I was on until I finally left the state and hit my home territory in New York. I was in and out of a daydream-like state. You know how it is when you're exhausted but trying to push on. I was so exhausted that even the caffeine wasn't giving me what I needed, and I was too cheap to spend the money on a hotel. However, when I was approaching a curve, this is where my story occurs. My headlights lit up something that looked like a person, except almost double, if not triple the size. I had to swerve to avoid it, and I sure as hell woke up from that. I wasn't sure if I'd clipped him or her, but my car started sliding, and I went into a ditch. The first thing I did was get out to make sure that I hadn't just hit somebody. I was just thinking, why would there be somebody out here in the middle of nowhere, wearing all black? There was no one around, and I was pretty sure that I'd seen somebody on the road. I was certain of it. My car was good and stuck. The tires couldn't grip in the mud, and I didn't want to call for a tow truck, but it was starting to look like my only option. So I just sat in my car and tried phoning out when I was sure that I saw movement. I was hoping it was someone coming to help me, but then thought it was just my exhaustion playing tricks on me. I shook my head, wondering if it would be a good idea just to sleep right there in the ditch and wait for the tow truck. Then it started to rain, heavily. I was really tired, and the sound of the rain wasn't helping me stay awake. Then the thoughts of sleep were suddenly gone when the driver's side window was blocked by the drenched, furry body of something very, very large. It was walking on 2 legs, but there was no way this thing was human. It stopped and peered into the window. It was so ugly and evil-looking that it's the only description that I feel is even appropriate. It was pointing its long, wolf-like snout right at me and baring its teeth in a menacing grin, like it was smiling at me, as if it was happy that I was trapped in this little metal enclosure. Those long yellow fangs, and the worst part was its eyes. There was absolutely no soul in them, but they had a supernatural glow. It then ran its claw on my window, which made a scratching sound. It was so sadistic, just so evil. It maintained a stare and a grin like it was letting me know there was no way and nowhere that I could run. I then noticed another wolf-like creature come out of the downpour, and then another. I don't know how many there were, but I was paralyzed with fear. It seemed like forever, though. It was probably only a matter of seconds. But then they instantly disappeared. I looked around, hoping they were gone, and then wondering why they took off. And I soon found out. A pickup truck pulled in behind me. The old man stepped out, walked up to my driver's side window, and volunteered to pull me out of the ditch. He looked at me and asked if I was all right. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. He hooked a chain to my car and quickly pulled me out of the ditch. I thanked him profusely and offered to pay him for his trouble. He refused any payment. Then I felt comfortable enough to tell him what had happened to me, and that I'd never seen anything like it before. After I described what I'd seen, he got this strange look on his face, almost like he had heard about this before. I asked him questions, but he was suddenly very dismissive. I was positive that he was aware of these beasts. That was in November of 2020, and I'll never, ever forget it. I can only imagine what might have happened to me if that old man hadn't come to my rescue. Thanks for reading. Signed, Hunter. Number 2. Hi, Tattooed. I've really enjoyed hearing these stories and experiences you read here on your channel. I just finished your cryptids playlist, which had several dog, wolf, and other humanoid encounters. I like hearing these encounters because it makes me feel better to know that there are others out there who've had encounters with something that they can't explain. I decided that I would send you my weirdest story, which happened to me as a child. I have seen and felt strange things since then, but this encounter was both the strangest thing that has ever happened to me and, I believe, a catalyst for the other unusual things in my life and my interest in them. Several years ago, I sent this encounter to another well-known researcher, but I never heard anything back. I'm not surprised, as it seems pretty odd and seems made up, but I swear it did happen. What it was, I have no idea. When I was a little girl, my pawpaw lived in an old farmhouse in the upper end of Cleveland County, North Carolina. We used to go visit him every Saturday. My dad, my mom, brother, and I, along with usually several of my dad's brothers, his sister, and their assorted children, and we would congregate after lunch at Pawpaw's. Our cousins would play together outside and in the woods, which ran behind my pawpaw's farm and stretched for probably 10 miles out to a dirt road, beyond which was an apple orchard and a cattle pasture. This was the early 80s in a rural area, back when kids could just take off to the woods for hours, and it was okay. We would all have dinner together and then hang out until bedtime for us kids, when we would all head home. At the time, I had just turned 8. My cousin Jay was 6. My brother and Jay's sister were both small toddlers, barely walking. The night in question, Jay and I and our little siblings were the only kids present at Pawpaw's. He and I had spent the day playing in the woods as usual, and out in the yard where Jay was trying out his prized brand new skateboard. After supper, we hung out in the back bedroom, just watching TV until our parents informed us that it was time to go home. Pawpaw's house had a glassed-in porch, which also served as a laundry room on the front, right outside the kitchen. This porch, because of the way the lot was laid out and the house was built, was fairly tall, and looking out the windows gave you a panoramic and slightly elevated view of the backyard. I would speculate that the porch windows were about 20 feet up off the ground, and the backyard sloped away from the porch. The backyard was lit by 2 large lights, one of which was mounted on a pole to the left of the yard, and the other mounted on the side of Pawpaw's shop, which was to the right. They were both very bright, and each lit up a fairly large area. The only really shadowy part of the backyard was an area where a large tree stood, which cast a shadow that fell between the shop and the greenhouse, which was to the far left of the yard. It was under this tree that Jay had left his skateboard when we stopped playing to eat supper, and he and I decided that we should go out and get it while our parents were still saying their goodbyes in the kitchen. The Wolfman was in the backyard. We saw him at the same time. As soon as we entered the porch, and he was man-sized, and he looked exactly like a werewolf from some kind of bad B-movie. He had shaggy, dark brown wolfman head, with long pointed ears and a lighter brown muzzle. His hands were human-like, as best I can remember, though they were covered in dark fur, and he had these long claws. He was wearing a red and black checked flannel shirt and blue jeans. I don't remember anything about his feet, whether he had shoes or claws, but his legs were straight like a person's, not bent backwards like a dog. He was walking back and forth in the yard, almost robot-like, or as if he were on a track. I can't really describe it well. It was like his legs were moving a little, but not enough to actually count as walking. It was more like he was gliding, but in a jerky kind of way. His body was human in proportion, and he would move from the edge of the light from the greenhouse across the light near the shop, only stopping when he reached the end of the illuminated area, before turning around in a strange, jerky way and gliding back. His eyes were red and they kind of glowed, like one of those laser lights that you use to tease cats. That color and about that level of brightness. The only time he was out of our sight was when he passed into the shadowed area of the tree. He seemed to be showing off for us, wanting us to see him, or at least that was what it felt like. The feeling that he carried with him was one of overwhelming malevolence. I felt like he knew we were there, and we could see us watching, and feel that we were afraid, and that made him glad somehow. Not sure if that makes sense, but it was what I felt at the time. Dread and fear, and like he was aware of us, and doing what he was doing on purpose to try and scare us. Of course, we freaked out, and started screaming for our parents. And of course, once they all rushed out onto the porch, only to hear us hysterical because the Wolfman was in the backyard, they said the usual parent things about overactive imaginations and too much Scooby-Doo. Because even though he was there, walking back and forth right in front of them, and we could both see him, none of the adults present even bothered to look. I remember pointing and saying, "But it's out there," and being really frustrated because they just didn't seem to look for it. Finally, my dad, determined to put an end to all the nonsense, announced that he was going to go out into the yard and get Jay's skateboard from under the tree. We tried desperately to stop him, but he went anyway. At that time, the Wolfman was still doing his strange, gliding walk back and forth when my dad opened the porch door and hit the steps that led to the porch to the yard. He triggered the motion sensor light which was on the corner of the porch awning, lighting up the shadowed tree area. Just before this happened, the Wolfman had stepped into that shadowy area and disappeared from view into the dark. When the light came on, lighting up the tree area, the Wolfman was just gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. We never saw him again, though we became wildly obsessed with werewolves for a while after that, and started hoarding silver in case we needed to make silver bullets. When you're a child, it's pretty amazing what you can consider normal. We were scared at the time it happened, but it's like afterward, it didn't completely feel real because it was so bizarre, and we just sort of made a game out of it. A few weird things happened to us in the woods after that, but nothing that could be considered paranormal, beyond doubt, and nothing like seeing the Wolfman. Years passed, but I always wondered about what we saw that night. My cousin Jay forgot about it altogether. I asked him about it a few months ago, and he didn't remember it at all. What really brought it back to my memory was the story in Linda Godfrey's Real Wolfmen about the girl who saw the hitchhiking werewolf wearing clothes. Before that, I'd never seen a serious report of a canine or lupine humanoid wearing clothes in any publication. I don't often tell anyone about the Wolfman we saw because it sounds so completely crazy. Of course, my parents and Jay's parents never for 1 second believed we saw anything. But thank you so much for letting me share. Sincerely, Aaron. Number 3. Dear TB, this incident took place about 4 years ago. At the time, I was just 17 years old when 3 of my friends and I had been staying to a cabin in the Great Smoky Mountains of North Carolina. We were celebrating the end of junior year of high school, and it was just us 4. The first night we got there, we heard some noises outside the cabin, and an occasional tapping on the windows at about 1:30 in the morning. I didn't want to look outside to see what it was. My friend did say they couldn't see anything, so I looked out, but I too saw nothing. The next morning, we went outside and saw some footprints around the cabin going into the woods. These were footprints like I've never seen before, kind of long and narrow, with obvious claw marks on 4 toes. Fast forward to the night we decided to go outside and build a campfire. We were just joking around, laughing and having fun when we hear a growl coming from the woods. The shrubbery and smaller plants around us started moving like swaying in the wind, even though There wasn't any wind. I looked behind me and instantly noticed two amber eyes staring back at us. I turned to my friend and asked if he's seeing it too. He looks at me, pale in the face, and asks me, what the hell is that thing? I tell him I don't know what it is, but it seems to be massive, and I don't want to find out. So we start running towards the cabin and yell to the others what we saw. They immediately run with us, and soon we're all safely inside the building. They don't believe us and believe that we're pranking them. After a few minutes, they look outside, and it was standing about 30 feet from the cabin. I only caught a quick glance, but I can tell you that this creature was bipedal. About 9 feet tall, grayish-black hair, very, very muscular, with these massive claws and huge fangs. We closed the blinds and tried to forget about the thing, but we were absolutely terrified. Later that night, I went up to bed and I looked out my window. The creature was in the same area, but now staring directly at me. I thought about trying to take a photograph, but I truly didn't want to upset this thing. Needless to say, I didn't get any sleep that night, hoping daylight would soon be there. The very next day, we packed up and left, not wanting to spend another night in those woods. None of us even mentioned this incident among ourselves. This is the first time I've told anybody about this because I didn't think anybody would ever believe what I'd seen. The thought of that creature just staring into my eyes from my bedroom window still haunts me to this day. Signed, Jeremy. And there it is. 3 real encounters with the upright canine cryptid known as the Dogman, or, in one case here, the Wolfman. What are these creatures? Well, I personally don't know, but I get enough reports to know that people are seeing something, and that something is terrifying. If you've ever seen something that you just can't explain, whether it's a Dogman or not, send your story to the email in the description, and I may use it in a future video. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. And as always, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker.